Keynote Speakers Committee. And Livingston, I hand over to you to introduce our speakers.
Yes. Livingston Thompson is my name, and I have the pleasure to facilitate what we regard as an innovative session, meaning to say we haven't tried it before. So there are all possibilities for it not to work well. But because we are committed to making things work, we will make sure it works. Because we have today two keynote speakers from contexts that are different and from academic careers that where they have journeyed differently to this point. First of all, we have Dr. Randall Hansen, who works on contemporary migration and citizenship. He works in the area of eugenics and population policy and the effect of war on civilian populations. As an incoming director of the Monk School of Global Affairs and holding a chair in immigration and governance in Canada, he has several publications. Disobeying Hitler, German Resistance After Operation Valkyrie, and this is 2014. Sterilized by the State, Eugenics, Race and Population Scare in 20th Century North America, that was 2013. Immigration and Asylum in 1990. Citizenship and Immigration in Post-War Britain in 2000. And then we have Mai Nguyen-Phuong-Mai, Associate Professor of Cross-Cultural Management at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Mai started her career in journalism. She has lived, worked, and visited more than 100 countries, and is still freelancing in international media channels. She has distinguished herself as a reporter on a journey through the Middle East, tracing the path of Islam from where it began, city by city, westwards towards Africa and eastwards to Asia. At the moment, Mai, in her research interest, brings some insight from the field of cultural neurosciences and evolutionary biology, and bringing this to the field of cultural studies. And her latest publication, here, just got my copy, is a textbook entitled Intercultural Communication and Interdisciplinary Approach, When Neurons, Genes, and Evolution Join the Discourse. So, with an eye on the theme, we have these two speakers, both interesting and intriguing. Cultural neuroscience on one hand, political science on the other. Our aim is to have them engage each other, but also for us to engage them, asking them the same question, because we want to know the extent to which an interdisciplinary approach can contribute to our understanding of some of the things, some of the topics we care about. For example, immigration, living in a multicultural society, migration, integration policy, racism, and European conception of Islam, if we can get through all of them. Well, Mai, maybe we should begin with you. Tell us a little bit about this emerging field of cultural neuroscience. What is it, and what critical insight does it bring to our understanding of cultural orientation and developing a mindset for living in a multicultural society?
Thank you, Livingston.
Press a little harder.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
Yes. Thanks. Can you see the slide, or should I turn the slide? Yes, can you turn it on?
Your clicker.
So we have, it's great. Good morning, everyone. It's great to stand here. And we have, like Livingston already said, we have two very different things. So I have the honor to start first because I would like to give you some heads up about cultural neuroscience. I will really quick. Hopefully I can get through. We have cultural neuroscience as a newly emerging field. And I've got into this field for the last 2 years. And I'm excited to share with you. I have chosen 2 learning points to share with you today. And it would be the base of what we are going to refer back to the discussion with Livingston and Randall later on. Can I please have the slide? If the light is off, and here so people can see that. Okay, great. So I would like to start with a metaphor that many of us are familiar with. It compares culture with a software of the mind. I'm sure you know about that. And once a software or a set of value has been installed, then people are prompted to act and behave in a certain way. Okay, it is a symbol of the static paradigm, very dominant in our field. It perceives that culture is very stable, values are not very easy to change, and each country has a fixed position on a binary spectrum. As a result is that we have this strong causal link between values and behaviors. Now, because values are very stable, they act as anchors to predict the behavior. If you want to communicate effectively with someone from a different culture, you need to know their values, and then you can predict how they are going to act and behave. Okay. Well, it is very reassuring because it reduces the unknown and ambiguity. Now, I was a follower of this logic as well until I learned about the plasticity of the brain. Basically, is that the brain is not fixed. It grows, it reduces, it shrinks, and it adapts to the way we think and act. So this is how a brain looks, with a long axon to send the signal, and the other neuron has thousands of dendrites to catch the signals. So I created this simple image to make it easier to understand. You see neuron number 2 on the bottom is trying to catch the signal of neuron number 1 through the synapse. So they do not really touch each other, but there's a small gap between called the synapse. And if a certain thought and action is repeated frequently enough, then we would have a bigger dendrite from the neuron number 2, more receptors, more neurotransmitters through the synapse. And at one point, it would have more dendrites growing. Okay, it's like everything is put in a super highway for you. If I have to go from Dublin to Amsterdam, I have to first swim to the UK, walk through the UK, and swim to Amsterdam. But if I do it frequently enough, then the road will get bigger. There will be super highway and a flying route, and then millions of people helping me to even move faster. And at one point, you get from Dublin to Amsterdam without even thinking about it. It's very quick. So this is how it happens with our brain. A thought, an action that occurs once will be likely to occur again. And I want to show you how our brain grows in the course of 170 hours. So let's say, well, more or less 7 days. The moving point that you see on the screen are the axon and the dendrite trying to communicate with each other as a consequence of your thought and your action. A practice of 50 minutes can change your neural pathway. Even when you sleep, your brain does not sleep at all. The cell can shrink up to 60% to accommodate new learning pathway. This is happening in your brain right now, right here. Is it amazing that our brain physically rewires itself to help you forge new pathway, to create new habits, and to adapt to different culture? So it is a sort of chicken and eggs, really, so to speak. If you have a certain thought and action repeated frequently enough, then you create a strong neural pathway. And strong neural pathway will in turn prompt your behavior. And I would say that it is really important because we would have to rethink what the static paradigm promised, that value leads to behavior, because actually value can change, and I'm going to show you how. If you have to have this effortless conduct, like I just showed you in the brain growth, you should have no conflict between the thought and the action. If you value one thing and you have to act the opposite, you face a state called cognitive dissonance. I cannot move from Dublin to Amsterdam subconsciously if I consciously dislike it. So I have a problem. So evolution has a solution for me. I will slowly change my attitude and my value to the point that it is consistent with my action. That there is no conflict between the reason of doing it and the actor of doing it. And we see this every day. We had a lot of routine that we hated when we were young, like practicing piano or praying. But if we do it frequently enough, it becomes part of our life and part of a value system. During the Nazis, for example, many people did not agree with the agenda, but their frequent practice muted the conscience to be in sync with the behavior. Soldiers, for example, did not really hate their enemy, but demonizing them would make them really the enemies. The enemies are the evils or the bad guys. In marketing, we have foot in the door strategy. It means that once you have committed a small request, you have the inner need to move on, to go along with that. And I see a lot of people with the children recognize the second one. So what does that mean? It means that we change our values to fit our behavior. And it means that we now have the neural evidence to prove what psychologists has been telling us for all time, that once given a role, you act that role and you become that role. And you are what you repeatedly do. And then we have to rethink the one-dimensional, the causal link between values and behavior, because this is actually the two-way street. Now, the second learning point that I want to share with you in a very short introduction is a very important promise of the set paradigm is values are binary. So we would have this kind of a spectrum. A culture is either collectivist or individualistic or somewhere in between, but never both collectivistic or individualistic at the same time. Unthinkable. Okay, and this has a lot to do with how our brain works. So on the picture you see that the cerebral cortex, that is where higher thinking process happens, and the amygdala, that is our fear detector. Now, any stimulus that enters our brain, the brain system, will be relayed in two directions, to the cerebral cortex and to the amygdala. The interesting thing is, the amygdala decides if the object is safe or dangerous, if the person is safe or dangerous, before the cortex has time to figure out what the object is or who the person is. It decides really quick in 170 of the second. So the moment I see something, I decide, okay, it is friends or foe, dangerous or safe, enemies or in group or out group. Really, really quick. Okay. And this has a lot to do with the way we see the world. It's based on an amygdala. We see the world in opposites, as black and white, positive, negative, male and female, creator, sun and moon, west and east. Think about that, the earth is round. And we see that in the theory development too. It's based on the amygdala of the binary, good or bad. I will show you this. We are familiar with this, right? All of us, I guess. Femininity is a society where both men and women are caring. And masculinity is a society where men are assertive and women are caring. Now, if you follow the first logic, then I'm sorry, a masculine society is where both men and women are competitive and assertive. Why is that? A society where masculine, as I'll say, where men are assertive and women are caring, or I would say, men are caring and women are assertive, gentlemen, it exists. I'll show you later. It shouldn't be called masculine at all. It should be both masculine and feminine. The problem is, the static paradigm, under the influence of the binary reaction of the amygdala, cannot deal with a society with two contrasting values existing at the same time. And in the struggle to understand such a complexity, it makes such a society a masculine one. If someone says that it's a little bit sexist, I don't know how to argue against it. And in case you wonder, well, which society is that men are caring and women are assertive, it's in Benin and in many matriarchal societies these days. If you go to Tibet, you see that. Okay. So we may wonder, okay, so are we doomed with this binary reaction? Because we see that in everyday life, we see it in theory development. It doesn't have to be, that's the good news. It doesn't have to be and it shouldn't be. But, and this is a big but, a big if, okay? The binary reaction begins as a natural tendency in the amygdala. But plural thinking occurs if you give it enough time under no threat condition. I want to show you the second one. So we know the amygdala with the binary support, we know the several types for high thinking process. The third element I'd like to show you is anterior cingulate cortex, we call it ACC. Okay? That is a device to detect biases, to help us have rational thinking and to detect the errors. Okay? Given more time, the ACC will calm the amygdala down and help the amygdala to communicate very nicely and smoothly with the cerebral cortex to have very, very complex and dynamic thinking. How complex and dynamic thinking? I want to show you. It's amazing. We normally think that a person has a set of value, and that set of value will predict the behavior of this person, right? Neuroscience has proved the other way around, that a normal person can accommodate opposing values at the same time. And in this picture is an amazing paper from Wang. You see, there are three things. We have the dorsal prefrontal cortex on the top, the ventral medial cortex down right, and the PCC. Now the VMPFC is the selfhood. The dorsal on top is the other. So when a person is primed with words such as we, our, us, that's collectivistic, right? Just by briefly looking at these words, you see that from the brain image, there's connection between the self and the other. So you see the red arrow. But when I look very briefly at individualistic words, I, me, my, very briefly, you see that there is no connection between the self and the other. Go straight from the self to the posterior cingulate cortex. That's where action planning happens in the same person. What does that mean? It means that we have an amazing plastic brain that can support us to be a multi-control person in our mind. That we can process very complex and dynamic information to the point that we can be both collectivistic and individualistic at the same time, as long as the context activates that element in us.
Mai, can I ask you just to put that on pause for a little bit? I'm going to come back to that.
It is actually great. It's the end point of the
right.
We're going to come back to the whole discussion with this one.
We will come back to that. The idea of the relationship between values and behavior, and this idea of values and being binary as being critical.
Absolutely.
Yes. But let me come to you, Randall, and maybe tell us a little bit about what is it that political science brings to this understanding of cultural values, and if you like, especially as we're facing European society today.
Here you go.
Do
you want to turn on the light or
you don't need the light on, do you?
Do you want the light on? No, they'd rather hear me not see it. The classic face made for video. Well, let's see, I can take a very different approach, I have to say. My work is really in comparative immigration studies, which sits at the boundary of economics, sociology, and cultural studies. And I think the question that was put for me was, what role does culture play in a political scientist's approach to immigration, and how does my discipline approach the field? Well, I think political science approaches immigration and culture in two senses. In the broadest sense, what I'm interested in as a political scientist is the politics of immigration. What sort of role does it play in political debate? How does it shape national politics? What consequences does that have? We used to think of that immigration as, in fact, a fairly minor issue of low politics. but most recently it's arguably determined the very future of the United Kingdom, and that it was really quite decisive in the Brexit vote. And I'm also interested in the sort of institutions, policies, and practices that are needed to make immigration work. So what do you have to have in place to cope with regular high levels of immigration and to cope with a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic society? Now, in this context, there are lots of debates about culture, and this really involves the two versions of one question. Do diverse societies need a common culture to function? And is that common culture a matter of political concern? Does it need to be officially fostered, sustained, nurtured? Or will it sort of take care of itself? And culture is understood here in two senses. The first is, I think, the generally recognized need for a common culture to get through life wherever you are, the sort of practices that exist on the street. Do you queue? Do you not queue? Do you say please? Do you not say please? When you're in Canada, someone steps on your foot, you apologize, they don't apologize. All this sort of stuff that you just kind of pick up. You pick up naturally. And it matters. I mean, in the absence of that, a given day would be rather difficult. The more controversial, the more important question is, do you need to foster a common culture in terms of generally shared attitudes about the rules of the game and the place of citizens within society? And what that refers to explicitly is attitudes on the rights of women, the rights of racialized minorities, and the rights of sexual minorities, LGBT people. And I think here it's fair to say, and I'll make this my last point because I've only got a couple of minutes, it's fair to say that there's a bit of a disjuncture between European populations and my discipline. I think it's fair to say that most people across Europe, and this would be true of Canada as well, believe that those liberal rights need to be sustained through a common culture which is official, which is explicit, and frankly, which immigrants are told straight up, this is the way it is here. This is a society that values the rights of women, the rights of racialized minorities, the rights of LGBT people. The consensus, with the exception of an Israeli scholar named Liav Orgad, in political science, in the social sciences, is that you don't worry about culture, you just establish the legal framework and make discrimination on the grounds of gender, of race, of sexuality illegal, and the culture will take care of it itself. And indeed, that there's something imperialist, condescending, essentialist, maybe even racist, in forcing a common culture on newcomers. So that's sort of the state of the debate within my discipline.
Well, it'd be interesting to see, thank you, Randall, how that idea, at least how those, that theory may be applied to a particular problematic that we face in Europe. And I'd be interested to see how you respond to this as well, Mai. The recent movement of peoples, the wave of migration in Europe has led to a number of countries constructing borders, literally as a way to keep people out, or some may say keep people in. But what do you, from the respective disciplines that you come, what do you make of this development of the actual construction of borders? Would you like to make an attempt at that first, Randall?
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
Sure. Well, I mean, just a slight nuance on the premise, in the sense that when you actually look at the immigration numbers to Europe across the years, they're actually consistently quite high.
Yeah.
So Germany, on average, takes in 300,000 net immigrants every year, and in most years, without much political controversy. So you would never believe this if you read the press, but the major European countries, Germany, until 10 years ago, the United Kingdom, to this day Ireland, actually cope reasonably well with regular, relatively high levels of immigration. What changed in 2015 is that we had a classic mass influx, not immigration, but asylum seekers and refugees, and arriving in massive numbers. I mean, 800,000 to Germany in 1 year was a figure I never would have expected or predicted in 2005, or for that matter in 2011. Well, what's the lesson of all of that? And what does this mean for borders? Well, fortunately or unfortunately, we live in democracies. I'd like to say fortunately. And in democracies, you cannot have regular, reasonably high levels of immigration without public support. And what we learned in 2015, 2016, and what we actually learned in the United Kingdom in 2000 and 2003, what we learned in Germany in 1992, what we learned in America in the 90s and early 2000s, is that the actual number doesn't matter very much. A society can cope very well with 50,000 per year or 300,000 per year. What matters hugely is a general perception in the public that migration is managed and that the borders are more or less under control. Once the public loses that perception, and it might just be a perception, but once that's gone, support for immigration just collapses. So you had, until through the Turkish EU deal, which has no end of moral and perhaps legal problems associated with it, until the Germans regained a measure of control over their borders, you saw what no one expected, a resurgence of the extreme right in Germany. And Angela Merkel was not going to lose her job. So that's the lesson. You need borders for public support.
There's something about values and behavior in this amount of borders, Mai. How
I like to connect with what Randall just said. That it's not about the number of the refugees or the migrants. It's about the control, the perception that it is control and manage. And I'd like to show you just very quickly this slides. It's a brand image of how we think and react when we judge people who are of our in-group, so friends, or out-group, or so in this case, a refugee or immigrant. And you see that we use different brain reasons to judge people from in-group and out-group. And why is that? Because in-group and out-group is so important. In-group is the support and out-group is a threat. And in this case, many of observers in the country see immigrant as a threat. And if you see immigrant as a threat, you use a different brain. You see them as an out-group. And you ask, are they a threat? And that's the wrong question. This is absolutely a wrong question. And media is supporting that kind of question by publishing data and articles about what is the consequence of the immigrants. The question is, just like Randall said, it's the management of the government. It's the policy of the government. It's the efficiency of the government instead of the immigration, or instead of the refugees. And government is afraid to face that question. So of course, they will take a scapegoat. And who else would be an easy scapegoat? Immigrant and refugee. Let's blame them.
Yeah, well, I wonder if I might continue with you for a moment, Mai, and talk about political populism.
Yeah.
Expressing itself in a certain, if you may like, expression of fear in relation to migrants.
Yeah.
Should political populism be combated?
Nice. Show you another one. I'll give this one. Populism. So let's start with something about how we look at the political orientation. So remember we have the ACC, that is where we detect the biases and rational thinking, and we have the amygdala is a device. People figure out that it has a lot to do with our brain. Liberal thinkers have a bigger ACC, a bigger gray matter in the ACC than conservative thinkers. Conservative thinkers just have bigger amygdala, they are more fearful. It's easier to get the fear detective activated in the brain of conservative. Now, populism is nothing Other than using the in-group, out-group, and using the people with amygdala and making it even more active. However, I would like to point out a very important thing, that we are in a very hostile political environment, that even liberal thinkers are so fearful of their values as well. So I'm not so sure if they are really using their ACC. I think they are using their amygdala as well. Look at what is happening in America. No matter what Trump is doing, it's wrong. The amygdala is talking, not the ACC. So I think the ACC of the people, the liberal people in many countries are getting smaller and the amygdala is getting bigger. It's a show of angry amygdala shouting at each other.
Well, Randall. Well, is there a political science view on this now of populism? Should we?
My ACC is still working.
Yes, that's a hard act to follow. Let's talk a little bit about the causes of populism, and then we can say something about how to respond to it. And the trope that we're constantly hearing is that those who voted for Brexit and for Trump, and for Le Pen, for the alternative for Germany, that these are the losers of globalization. That's the first trope. And the second trope is that we've all got to get out of our bubble. Not we all, you all. We all in this room. That all these liberal elitists don't understand how the world works, and there's an element of we owe the world an apology. And I actually think the second one's complete nonsense, and the first one's partly nonsense. Now, it's definitely the case that, well, it's the case to a degree that when you map the vote outcomes for Brexit, for Trump, for Le Pen, onto the spatial economic geography of those countries, there's a correlation, a rough correlation between parts of the country that are not doing well and those who vote for the populists. You all know this. London did not vote for Brexit, and central London even less so for Brexit. But when you break that down further, what you find is that the poorest of the poor voting for the populists. They are voting for, particularly in the case of the United States, they're voting for those whom they actually should be voting for. They're voting for the Democrats, voting for the social democratic options. So the question is, how do you explain that? That element that isn't economic deprivation, inequality, about which we can all agree something needs to be done. What is the other element? And here, I think we have something quite pernicious, which is a poisonous ideology, and I'm referring to Casmuda's work here, that divides the world into two types. The pure, true people who vote for Trump and whom Trump understands, and this corrupt, vaguely foreign, threatening, unpatriotic elite. Us. And this is an ideology because it's completely impervious to fact. It doesn't matter what evidence you present. This is believed. And because it has a global dimension to it. And what was most striking, I'm sure many of you on Twitter, is if you followed, and I make a point of following and being followed by a significant number of Trump supporters, you had a mindless embrace of Marine Le Pen on the part of people who I know knew nothing about France or the issues or what was at stake for France or much less for Europe. And that ideological commitment is dangerous and needs to be challenged directly and needs to be fought. And the last thing we should do in fighting that is apologize for our values. Liberals go in the back, legs up, we're terribly sorry, we got it all wrong. No, we didn't. Firstly, we were the ones saying for 30 years there's too much inequality in the world. Taxes are insufficiently progressive. This Thatcherite, conservative, Republicanite war on the welfare state is dangerous, will have consequences. So A, we don't have historically anything to apologize for. And secondly, we don't have to apologize for liberal achievements for the rights of women, racialized minorities, and sexual minorities. So this is the last moment which we should be feeling insecure. On the contrary, we should be feeling robustly confident.
Well,
sorry for the speech.
Well, maybe we should be bold enough to tackle the issue of Islamophobia in Europe. I do not know what would be your point of view, Mai. It exists. There's a fear of Islam. There's fear of Muslims, and there's a fear of Islam as a religious community. What should be done about, from your point of view, of the field of cultural neuroscience?
Well,
press the button hard.
Yeah. Yes, of course. We should start again from the in-group, out-group, from the amygdala binary reaction as well. I mean, I'm not sure if we should take that religion models as a focus point because it does not just happen with the Muslim, like Randall said. It's women, minority, homosexuality. The amygdala does not see religion. The amygdala does not see skin color. The amygdala does not see what kind of background you have. It only sees in-group and out-group. And in this case, Muslims have become an easy scapegoat for the out-group. Very, very simple. And if you can refer back to what we said about the binary, I'd like to get back to the confirmation biases. And it is so important because it is based on in-group and out-group, the binary reaction of the amygdala, to the point that if you try to convince a person with correct information, that person has a very firm belief that the Muslims or the women or the minority or the immigrant or the refugees are the reason of the consequence. If you give them the right information, they are not going to believe it. In fact, the opposite happens. Their belief gets stronger. It's called the confirmation bias. And that is why Trump said, if I shoot someone on the Fifth Avenue, I still get vote. And a very important brain image study showed us that voters only hear positive message from their in-group leaders and negative message from the out-group leaders. So it means that they hear what they want to hear. And Islamophobia is exactly that. They're going to filter, oh, talk about everything, they're not going to hear it. Just one word Muslim and Islam, yes, I pick it. Positive, I take it, or I reject it, depending on if it's in-group or out-group. So it's so important to refer back to the binary reaction of the amygdala and see that Muslim is just one, and well, unfortunately, a very, very easy scapegoat in this reaction. I would like to refer also to the value behavior that I taught at the beginning. It's wrong to convince people that Trump is wrong. It's wrong to use logic and reasoning. Because of the confirmation bias, the more you say that, the more information, the more correct information, the more logic you give, the more they believe in their wrong belief. It's confirmation bias. So what to do? You have to put it in the state that I said that is no threat. First, there must be a safety environment to talk, that they do not feel like they are cornered. So I did this with my students. I always have some students who are anti-Muslim, anti-Islam in my class. Fine. I never convince them. I never give them the reason that, oh, I have so many Muslims and they are the most wonderful people in my life. I spent 1 year in the Middle East and that's the best time of my life. I never convince them that. They are not ready for logic and reasoning yet. I brought them to a mosque, the whole class. So they talk with the prayers, they talk with the people, and that is the behavior. You need to start with behavior. Remember the foot in the door technique? Once they have done something, their reasoning starts to change slowly to be inconsistent. with the behavior. You need to start with the behavior. You need to start with the action. You need to start with something very, very small, but once people has committed to a small request, they're gonna feel the inner need to go through. Start with the behavior and the value will change.
And Randall, from a political standpoint, what do you make of Islamophobia?
Oh, it's real. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And it's reached a fever pitch in the United States, which is in a sense the last thing we expected 20 years ago, where much of the writing was about how, because Americans themselves often display Iranian levels of religious commitment. I mean, every sports person in America thanks Jesus first, their mother second. That Americans were somehow more comfortable with religion, and therefore Muslims would find a place in America that they didn't in Europe. Well, that was just wrong. I mean, you see a level of rhetoric which is just pure bigotry, and racism isn't quite the right word, but pure bigotry. The easy and constant equation of Muslims with all Muslims are rapists, all Muslims are criminals, caricatures on Twitter that really could be taken out of the 1930s, swapping Jews for Muslims. So it's absolutely there. How do we combat it? Well, partly we have to have the war of the facts and not give up with them and keep presenting the evidence. I mean, it's difficult. I had a long Twitter spat with someone who was convinced that the Ottoman Empire was allied with Hitler during World War II. And as often as I said, no, the Ottoman Empire ended after World War I, he remained unconvinced. Accused me of fake history, which is now another one of the popular terms. So we have to keep it up, and we have to, this is in a sense where we haven't quite lost populist supporters. When you call them out on bigotry, they don't like it. Very few of them will admit, I am a bigot. So to that degree, we still share a common, in a very loose sense, liberal space. And so we have to call out bigotry and we have to call out prejudice for what it is, and again, not cave on those basic commitments. All of that said, I'm going to move in a slightly different tack. This doesn't mean we need to go in the opposite direction and adopt an uncritical attitude towards Islam or any religion, Christianity, Judaism, Sikhism, Hinduism, whatever. And what I find among my liberal friends is a tendency to make two mistakes. One, to equate criticism of religion with racism, and it is simply not. Religion, I know some of you will disagree with me, but religion is a chosen attribute. One chooses to be a person of a particular faith. One does not choose to be black or to be gay. So there's a conceptual distinction there that we need to keep in mind. And secondly, so I'm jumping between solutions and methods. Clearly, part of the way of battling Islamophobia is reaching out, building alliances across faiths between Muslims and non-Muslims. But when that's done, strangely enough, at the University of Toronto, they always call on the most conservative representatives of the Muslim community they can find in Toronto and put them on a panel with me. So I'm sharing a panel with someone who thinks and says that homosexuality is an abomination. Well, this is a very strange space for me to be in. And we would never dream of doing that. There's something actually racist and essentializing about that. I mean, if we had an interfaith dialogue, let's say as a secularist with Christians, we would never bring in a Christian fundamentalist. We wouldn't dream of it. We would bring in, mainstream Anglican, member of the Anglican faith. And so I think there's an element in that method of essentializing Muslims and associating this vastly complex faith with the most conservative elements. So the short answer there, reach out to Muslim liberals. Last point, I know I'm abusing my time. For all the problem of Islamophobia, and it is a problem, I won't deny it for a second, when you keep your eyes firmly on the public opinion data, the attitudes towards Muslims in France and in Germany, they're well, actually I won't say Germany, in France and in Britain, they're not as bad as the rhetoric would suggest.
Well, we're almost out of time for the session, believe it or not, but within a context like this, with many practitioners who use the different cultural frameworks and for how we come to understand culture, whether it be Hofstede or Trompenaars or Bol or Bennett, as the case may be. What do you, from a neuroscience point of view, make of these frameworks?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me see if I have the slide.
Oh, yes. Okay. Good point of view. So I'd like to, again, from the
You have to
point of
make it
view
quick, though,
of...
because you're right.
Sorry?
Just say you have to make it quick.
Yeah. From the neuroscience point of view, I'd like to share with you of how my thinking has changed, and considering seeing it from a totally different perspective. And you see that on the study paradigm, you see completely different ways. So it's very static, it's very one-dimensional. And on the dynamic paradigm, people will say that we shouldn't index the values because they should be seen as the first best guess. And well, very, very sophisticated stereotypes to use the word of one of the researchers. So it's very important framework, provided that we do not stop there and move beyond that, because it's quite complex. We shouldn't use the amygdala reaction to see the world, which is so complex and so turbulent as we see it right now. And so we have to look at the way that behavior can change the belief, because as many of us in the culturalists, once we have this kind of behavior that we're going to use this framework, we're going to use this kind of theory, we would follow through, and we would always seek examples and cases that fit the framework. And we see non-typical and paradoxes as errors, as something that is not typical, as not in the system, because we want to fit the paradigm. Okay. Also, in the context of populism, we also have to reconsider the way that we use countries consistently as a proxy independent variables to analyze the world. In the context of populism and nationalism, we should reconsider that. And also, one point that I learned from the dynamic paradigm is that we have the potential to become a multicultural person in our mind. And why should not we? Because we are living in the time of turbulence. And it is very promising. It means that we are not just product of the culture, we are also the producer of the culture. We are an active author of this culture, that we can make the change. We are not a culture dope. We have the authorship of this culture, and we can do things to change it. Starting not just something, an idea in your mind, but a behavior, because you know that repeated behavior will lead to the change in value. And it is very promising, and I hope we can all start doing that. Thank you very much.
Randall, you have a final word. Would you like to make a comment about cultural frameworks?
No, I wouldn't. I actually, I think Mai said it very well. I'll leave it at that, but thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of the session. I do not know what to think about this innovation, but let's give our two presenters a hand for our event.